All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining today's informational webinar for interested applicants for the Violence Intervention and Prevention, or VIP, grants program. My name is Sam Cook, and I serve as Director of Policy and Planning at the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, or PCCD, as we are more commonly known. And I'm joined by a couple of my PCCD colleagues who are going to be co-presenting and helping to facilitate today's webinar, including Zoe Miner, who's our VIP program manager, Crystal Lauver, who's our fiscal management specialist from our Office of Financial Management and Administration, and Allie Gantz, our communications director. But before we begin today's webinar, we wanted to cover just a couple quick housekeeping rules. First, today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll be posting a link to that recording on our website once it becomes available. You'll also be able to download a copy of today's PowerPoint slides for reference, so please don't feel like you have to scribble things down super quickly. You will be able to get a copy of those slides. We encourage you to take a moment to check your audio settings just to make sure you're able to hear today's presentation. Please note that we cannot hear you. However, you will be able to submit questions through the written Q&A feature in the Microsoft Teams live event platform. Questions submitted via that Q&A chat won't be immediately visible to all participants, but please rest assured that they have been received and will be reviewed by our team. Today's webinar session will specifically focus on the VIP track of this year's funding announcement. If you are interested in learning more about the Coordinated Community Violence Intervention, or CCVI, application track of this year's VIP grants program, we encourage you to register to participate in a webinar that we'll be hosting tomorrow. And both webinars are being recorded and will be available to watch on demand on PCCD's website a little down the road. So with all that behind us, let's go ahead and dive right in. So today's session will provide an overview of PCCD and an overview of community violence in Pennsylvania, including some recent trends, as well as some data resources that we think may be helpful for you as you start the application process. We'll then cover some basic information about VIP funding before diving into some of the specifics of the fiscal year 2023-2024 VIP grants funding announcement, where we'll touch on some of the differences between VIP and CCVI application tracks, as well as share some tips and best practices for navigating the application process successfully. We'll then spend the bulk of our presentation on any questions that you have for us and that have been submitted to PCCD. Just a friendly reminder, and it's in the chat as well, that you can view all of the questions that we've fielded and answered to date on the Q&A section of our website. So I encourage you to check out that resource. We'll then close with information on additional funding opportunities offered through PCCD that may be of interest. So first up, just a little bit about our agency for folks who may be less familiar with our work. So the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency was established in 1978. We turned 45 years old just this year through Pennsylvania state law. We serve as the Commonwealth's Justice Planning and Policymaking Agency. And so our mission is really to enhance the quality, coordination, and planning within the criminal and juvenile justice systems, facilitate delivery of services to victims of crime, and to increase the safety of Pennsylvania's communities. Our agency's strategic priorities focus on a number of public safety issues that impact Pennsylvanians and the communities they live in, and that includes a strategic focus on preventing and reducing gun violence. We're a relatively small state agency that's housed within the executive office. We have about 150 employees or so working across 4 different offices, and we're directed by an overarching commission board, which is advised by 7 different advisory committees, 2 training boards. And these groups are really comprised of experts and practitioners who help shape our policy, program, and funding decisions. So we're really a collaboratively structured agency, and we really take that stakeholder engagement aspect of our mission really seriously. Our responsibilities and programs as an agency fall into a vast number of areas, including funding and grants, technical assistance, data and research, victims compensation, training, and many, many more. So if you're interested in learning more about any of those areas, would definitely encourage you to check out our website, which is located at www.pccd.pa.gov. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the Violence Intervention and Prevention, or VIP, grants program, we did want to take a couple of moments just to provide a little bit of context around community violence in Pennsylvania and why this funding is so important. So as you can see here on this slide, that line graph is showing you the rate of firearm-related deaths in Pennsylvania versus the United States over the past decade or so. And so you can see that gun violence overall in this country and in our Commonwealth has increased pretty significantly in the last decade, and certainly in the last couple of years post-pandemic. So an estimated 1,906 Pennsylvanians died in 2021 from gun-related injuries. Worth noting that a significant portion of those are suicide-related. However, the share of homicide-related firearm deaths did increase pretty significantly in 2021. We know from the research and from our work in the field, gun violence definitely disproportionately impacts people in communities of color here in Pennsylvania and across the country. We encourage applicants and folks who are interested in connecting their proposals to trends, which is always something we encourage you to do, to really check out those resource links and data options that are listed on this slide. Pennsylvania has a lot of really great data sets that are related to public safety, public health, that may be of interest and value to you as you build your application and kind of set the stage for why your project is needed. So that includes the Uniform Crime Reporting, or UCR, data that's overseen by state police. Pennsylvania Department of Health has a violent death reporting system. There's also a couple of reports that PCCD has authored and published in recent years that may be helpful. And that includes a snapshot of crime in Pennsylvania over the last decade, as well as a report we published analyzing the cost of non-fatal firearm injuries in Pennsylvania over a 5-year period. So encourage you to check that out. Non-fatal firearm injuries is a really important topic, I think, too, because certainly 1,906 Pennsylvanians dying from firearm injuries is significant. But we know that on average, there's about 3,000 people each year in our Commonwealth who are injured by firearms. And so the scope of gun violence really goes far beyond fatalities. So, I think numbers are certainly one thing. We know that behind each of those numbers, though, there are certainly incalculable impacts that violence can wrought on individuals, communities, and beyond. And so this quote is from our chair, Lieutenant Governor Austin A. Davis, and he said in a recent event that every time there's a shooting, there are more victims. The people who are killed, people who are injured, family members who are mourning, survivors who are traumatized, and the community members who are scared to live in their neighborhoods. I know because I was one of those community members, and now 18 years later, this work is more important than ever. So we're really proud to take on this work. We know it's important, and we're really grateful to each of you for the work that you're doing to help address this important issue. So we know why this funding is important, so let's talk about what the funding has looked like, both in its history and this year. So as you all might be aware of already, the VIP funding is administered by the School Safety and Security Committee here at PCCD. So this funding is designed to support effective local intervening and preventative measures to stop gun and group violence in areas that are experiencing high rates of violence in Pennsylvania. So this funding has been able to support a large number of projects over the past 2 years, about 200 or so, with a range of awarded grantees and projects, everything from smaller grassroots organizations to more large-scale citywide and regional programs. So to date, we've had over $150 million in VIP funding that's been awarded to organizations and projects across the Commonwealth. You can learn more about the projects that we've supported through this grant program by checking out the Gun Violence Reduction and VIP Grants dashboard on PCCD's website, which you can see on that slide, or by checking out PCCD's broader grants map online. So one of the great things about this funding stream in particular is that VIP grants really can be used for a wide variety of purposes, and they've historically been used to support a broad range of programs that are designed to address both the root causes as well as the impacts of community violence, including all of the examples that you can see here on your screen. So VIP funds have supported efforts ranging from upstream youth prevention engagement activities to community violence intervention strategies. Think programs like street outreach and violence interruption or hospital-based violence intervention programs. VIP funds have also invested in programs that help people in communities impacted by gun violence heal and recover, from trauma-informed approaches and care to victim services to wraparound supports. So as we'll get into later in our session, VIP funds are guided by eligibility criteria that's prescribed in state law and described in the written VIP funding announcement. So we strongly encourage interested applicants to review that information and to consider how the proposed project activities that you are seeking VIP funds to support align with those VIP grant program goals to prevent and reduce gun and group-related violence within communities in both the short and the long term. So with all of that said, I'm happy to turn things over to my colleague Zoe Miner, who's gonna take y'all through this year's VIP grant funding announcement. So Zoe, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sam, and perfect segue so we can speak specifically now about this year's VIP funding announcement, and we will kick it off. So this year's VIP funding solicitation has two distinct application tracks. Number one is the VIP competitive grants, and number two, the coordinated community violence intervention or CCVI strategies grants. A couple of important distinctions between these two tracks that we wanted to be sure to cover today. First, we wanted to highlight project scope. So collaborative CVI strategies projects will support comprehensive systems-focused strategies that could entail multiple initiatives and programs developed and implemented with multiple organizations, whereas VIP competitive grants would be more individualized projects or programs supported by individual organizations or entities. CCVI projects are designed to provide more intensive place-based investments focused on a contiguous geographic area. So think a small city or a grouping of neighborhoods within larger cities. And by contrast, VIP grants projects could be much more flexible in their service delivery areas, from as small as 1 or 2 blocks to as large as regional or statewide initiatives. And while collaboration is encouraged and prioritized across the board with VIP funds, the coordinated CVI strategies projects require multiple cross-sector partners and coordination as a core feature of funded projects. As we've mentioned before, project designs and activities under the VIP track can align with a wide range of VIP eligible activities, models, and approaches, and there's so much flexibility here. CCVI strategies proposals, on the other hand, must meet specific prescribed project activities and deliverables that are unique to this track. So for example, you must identify a lead organization, you must engage in needs-based planning activities, etc. And more of these requirements will be outlined in the webinar that we have scheduled specific to that track tomorrow. In addition to that, too, more detailed information about each of these tracks is available in the written funding announcement, and specifically, the appendix provides an overview of the CCVI track. We'll also be hosting, like I mentioned previously, as a reminder, we'll also be hosting an informational webinar on the CCVI track if that now sounds of interest to you. And we would encourage you to register for that. It takes place tomorrow on December 15th. And then if you're unable to make that event live, like we mentioned previously, both of these presentations, including the slides and the recordings, will be made available on PCCD's website. So an important note, applicants may only submit one application under this funding announcement, meaning you can't come in under both tracks. So that said, nothing prohibits an organization from making direct application and also being included as a proposed subrecipient in another eligible applicant's proposal. But you should take care to ensure all funding requested, whether directly or otherwise, is not duplicative and aligns with funding requirements. And one final important note that we want to touch on with this slide, which applies for all VIP funding. As with all PCCD grants, VIP funding is contingent upon availability and authorization of funds. Now moving on to a couple more key specifics that we want to share about the VIP track. The maximum amount an applicant can request in state grant funds is based on the applicant's current operating budget, with no applicant able to request more than 50% of their operating budget. But up to the overall request ceiling is $950,000 total. The project period is up to 36 months. This does not mean the project must be this long, but the project certainly can be. Applicants should plan for an approval processing time period as well as a time for planning and project implementation. And another important note specifically about the VIP track is that there is no match requirement. So now that we've covered how much funding VIP grants can provide, let's talk about who can make application under the solicitation. As you can see here, nonprofit organizations with 501c3 status, institutions of higher education, municipalities, counties, and district attorneys' offices are eligible to make direct application for VIP funding. We've received a number of questions about eligible applicants in the weeks since the solicitation opened, and we'll cover a little bit of those details here. So please note, district attorneys' offices can make application and submit a request for VIP funds in SurveyMonkey, but if they are recommended for funding, they will need to have their county submit a formal application in our eGrant system in order for us to proceed with an award. In addition, counties and municipalities must make direct application. An individual department, agency, or office, so for example, health department, law enforcement agency, probation and parole, may not come in on its own, but they can be included as proposed subrecipients within a county or a municipality's VIP application. As with past solicitations, while we strongly encourage applicants to consider collaborative and coordinated proposals, PCCD will consider applications submitted by different departments within an institution of higher education or university. Current PCCD grantees, including VIP grantees, are eligible to request funding through this year's solicitation and will be asked to describe the impact of their current or previous projects. Additionally, for this year's funding announcement, there are a few priority consideration areas, including 2 new priority areas. So applicants seeking funding to support collaborative projects, co-designed and co-implemented with multiple partners who are included as proposed subrecipients. This is a new priority for fiscal year 23 to 24. Applicants who have not previously received funding from PCCD to support violence prevention or reduction efforts. Another priority consideration area is to support continuation of current successful projects whose current VIP grant awards have ended or are ending as of January 31st, 2024. Again, this is a new priority area this year. Proposed initiatives that would take place in zip codes or municipalities with the highest rates of gun violence and other violent crimes and other need-based factors are also given priority consideration under this year's funding announcement. So as stated before, VIP funding can and has supported a wide variety of projects and programs, but at a minimum, the project proposals must align with the eligible activities under Section 1306-B, the PA Public School Code, which can be found on page 4 of the funding announcement. Additionally, applicants must also identify the specific type or types of anti-violence strategy or strategies that would be supported with grant funds. Broadly speaking, these strategies could fall into 3 buckets. So they could fall under either prevention, intervention, or transformation and healing. Some more details on this front can be found on page 5 of the funding announcement, but we wanted to take a little time to walk through these anti-violence strategies today, which mirror categories that have been widely used in the public health and community violence intervention space. So we talked earlier about how VIP funds are designed to address gun and group-related violence from its roots to its impacts. The 3 types of strategies shown on this slide demonstrate that continuum. So beginning with prevention, also known as primary prevention, prevention strategies address root causes and aim to lessen the likelihood violence will occur in the medium to long term. In general, these strategies are designed for individuals who have not yet become involved in violence or encountered specific risk factors for violence. These can include broad, general strategies and programs that target universal populations. These can include programming focused on youth, families, and communities. VIP funding can also support intervention strategies which reduce risk of violence among people who are at increased risk for violence involvement in the short term. This includes de-escalating efforts focused on individuals who are already involved in violent behavior. This approach is sometimes known as secondary prevention and can include a wide range of intervention approaches, from street outreach and violence interruption to safe passages programs, to hospital-based violence intervention programs, and much more. You can see a full list of these strategy examples on page 5 of the funding announcement. And finally, we know that the impacts of violence can deeply impact individuals and families and has ripple effects on entire communities. To that end, VIP funds can be used for programs and activities focused on long-term transformation and healing. These approaches are designed to address both individual and community trauma caused by violence and can include restorative and transformative approaches, prioritizing community strength, healing, and safety opportunities, supporting and resourcing impacted people, and practices strengthening connection with support systems. As described in the written funding announcement, these can look like victim services and trauma-informed approaches that engage individuals who have witnessed or experienced gun violence, including counseling, therapy, as well as environmental strategies designed to create healthier, vibrant communities where violence cannot thrive, such as crime prevention through environmental design approaches. Applicants can also describe other anti-violence strategies and programs that aren't explicitly identified within the funding announcement that otherwise align with the VIP grant program's goals, priorities, and eligible activities. Again, we encourage applicants to carefully review the written funding announcement for more detailed information. So let's dive a little deeper into the specific types of activities and expenses that VIP grant funding can support. So as you can see on this slide and in the written funding announcement, VIP grant funding can be used for a variety of costs, including personnel, salaries and benefits, contractors or consultants, facilitating referrals to community-based programs and services, including incentives and stipends for participants, supplies and equipment, training, travel and transportation-related expenses, including vehicle leases and other activities. VIP grant funds cannot be used for physical security or infrastructure-related costs, often referred to as hardening strategies, such as security cameras, building modifications, things like that. Funds also can't be used for construction or land acquisition, lobbying or political contributions, honoraria or bonuses, vehicle purchases, or any expenses that fall significantly outside of the funding announcement scope. And please note, and as always, PCCD does have final approval of all final budgets and can ask you to remove something if you get asked to submit an eGrants application as part of the next stage if your project is recommended for an award. At this time, due to the competitive nature of the funds, we cannot comment on specific expenses for your projects or specific project proposals, but we'll do our best to help clarify these eligible and ineligible expenses if you have any questions. We did want to highlight, especially for smaller grassroots organizations, your ability to budget for certain capacity building activities as part of your VIP grant application. This includes, but is not limited to, onboarding time, grants management activities such as data collection and reporting, staff training on model implementation, back office supports like bookkeeping, and even resources for your board. It is important to note, however, that these expenses can only be a portion of the budget and must be clearly detailed, explained, and justified on how they support program activities. One significant change from last year's VIP grant solicitation that we wanted to be sure to cover is that there is now a cap on the total amount of indirect costs you can come in for. Because this year's VIP solicitation is 100% state funded, federally approved indirect cost rates do not apply. Indirect costs are limited to 10% of what's called modified total direct costs, or MTDC. So how do you calculate MTDC? MTDC only includes those expenses shown under the first column on this slide. So salaries, wages, fringe benefits, materials and supplies, services, travel, and up to $25,000 for each subaward. They don't include costs in the second column, equipment, capital expenditures, rent, tuition remission, or subaward portions exceeding $25,000. It is important to note that admin costs need to be clearly justified as direct project costs, or they will be considered as part of that indirect cost and count toward the maximum 10% indirect rate. So here's a simple example of how you would calculate the MTDC. Please notice that the rent and gift cards as research incentives were not included as part of that indirect calculation. And I'll just pause on this slide to digest that before we jump into the next section of our presentation. Awesome. So now that we've covered the funding announcement, we wanted to pivot a bit and walk through the application process for this year's funding solicitation. So you might be thinking to yourself, where do I even start? We recommend all applicants that are community-based organizations download and review the Grant Applicant Readiness Checklist. This tool can be used as a self-assessment checklist and covers the minimum requirements that organizations should have in place in order to apply for, receive, and properly manage grant funds. You can find this resource on PCCD's website under the Applicant Resources section of our funding webpage. So for those of you who have applied for VIP grants in the past, you may have noticed that the application process looks a little different this year. We wanted to specifically point out the documents that you should review for drafting your application, as well as documents that you will be required to develop and submit as part of your SurveyMonkey application. All of the documents and resources you'll need are available on the Gun Violence Grants and Funding webpage. The link was provided in the chat and is provided in the funding announcement. So a couple things, read through the funding announcement in its entirety. Read and reference the application checklist as you work on your application. We recommend you print it out and check it off as you go. Read through the SurveyMonkey questions to prepare your responses outside of SurveyMonkey to prepare for submission. We also recommend you read through and save as the VIP track proposal narrative to prepare your responses to submit your finalized proposal narrative. This must be attached in your SurveyMonkey submission. And we'll talk a little bit more about this new application requirement in just a little bit. So what are all the steps that you need to keep in mind when you are applying? So number one, you need to review and prepare responses to the proposal narrative template. If you are applying under the VIP track, please be sure to review and complete that template. It is important to note there is a different template for the CCBI track. The funding announcement will be handy to reference as you're working on this. Number two, start to get the support letters or other documentation you will need to submit with your proposal. This would include any support letters or other documentation from your potential project partners. Step number three, you certainly want to complete the SurveyMonkey form. Be sure to have all your attachments ready, so this is a simple step for you. You can reference the SurveyMonkey question summary document on PCCD's website to get a sense of the information you'll need to provide and upload when you're ready for this step. And of course, number four, please submit your SurveyMonkey application. Please note SurveyMonkey will not send you a confirmation email after you hit the either done or submit button. The submission page verified that your initial request form has been submitted. That is what will show on your screen. If it helps, please take a screenshot for your records. So some of you now might be thinking too, so what happens after I do hit submit, after I do submit that application? The first thing, all applicants will receive notification in March 2024 of the status of their application, subject to the availability and authorization of funds. Approved grantees will be provided guidance on next steps to complete a full application in eGrants. And I cannot emphasize enough that eGrants is the platform that must be used for organizations to receive funding. The SurveyMonkey form serves as your initial request form. PCC staff will be available to assist you with this. And another thing that will be important to highlight is that the eGrants application must be submitted within 45 days. And another important time frame date that I want to highlight, the due date for the submission of your initial request form is Thursday, January 18th at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'm going to turn things over to Sam, and it'll take me a moment to open up the VIP proposal narrative.
Great, thanks, Zoe. While you're pulling that open, I'll just set the stage a little bit. So what you're seeing here is the proposal narrative template. It is a Word document that you can download off of our website. So this is a new application feature, as
Sam.
Zoe mentioned. No, you're good. So we wanted to take a little bit of time just to kind of walk you through it, since we know that this is a little bit of a pivot from prior application periods. So what you're seeing here is the narrative template that includes some instructions. So just worth noting, there is some flexibility that you have on formatting. So if you're like me and you have a personal favorite font, please know that you are not necessarily stuck with Times New Roman. However, you should be sure to make sure that it's a 12-point font, so it's readable and visible. We're also asking applicants to double space that and use standard 1-inch margins. So again, feel free to be creative within those parameters. You can feel free to also just use this template and remove the guiding statements. You could start a new document from scratch, whatever suits your fancy. You should just be sure, whichever approach you use, that it's really clear which required sections that you're addressing in your proposal narrative. So as you can see here, this is organized in 4 distinct sections. So it starts with organization background, then community need, project implementation plan, and then it goes to the need for funding. So you can see that under each of those prompts, we're providing you with a description of what you should cover in that section of the proposal narrative. You should think about a couple of things as you're building this proposal narrative. So one is about the information that you're going to be required to provide as part of the SurveyMonkey form. So there's a reference document to that Zoe mentioned a little earlier. You're already going to be providing, as an example, in that form, a lot of basics about your organization. So just think about how you're going to use this document in particular to really complement what you've already provided in other sections of your application. 10 pages will go quickly, so we really encourage you to focus on the most essential information that directly addresses the prompts that are included in this document, as well as obviously the criteria and requirements that are in the funding announcement. So just a couple things on technicalities. We really want you to make sure that you're able to upload this. So there is a 16 megabyte file size limit. So I said get creative with formatting. Just pay attention if you're using things like images, stuff like that. Just check and make sure you're not going well above that file size limitation, because that will prevent you from uploading. And then just want to make sure that you, again, are going to be uploading this into your SurveyMonkey form. So you will need to save a local copy before you do that. So I think, in terms of section by section, a lot of times we get the question of, well, how much should I provide in each area? The goal of this document is really for reviewers to have a very clear picture of what we're going to be funding if your grant award is approved. So all of these sections are important, but really encourage groups to pay careful attention and devote a pretty significant amount of your real estate to section number 3, which is your project implementation plan. And you can see that there's a lot of sub-bullets in here for the types of information that we're looking for applicants to provide in this section. And that includes, how your project design, what it will look like, who's going to be doing what will grant dollars pay for, and specifically how you're planning to reach and serve the individuals and communities who are kind of the focal points of your proposed project design. And then also providing a little bit of a timeline for when activities are going to take place. So again, you have flexibility on whether or not all of this information is provided in pure narrative form, if you want to use tables or graphics to kind of describe and cover that content. This is part of the reason we were using this type of an application structure this year, because we did get feedback in past funding cycles that as much as people love the SurveyMonkey application process compared to more traditional grants management platforms, it doesn't necessarily offer the greatest amount of flexibility in terms of kind of how you can respond to questions. So we are hoping that this gives a little bit more creative license for you all to tell your story, to provide some key details about the project, and really kind of make the case for why funding is needed. So with all of that, I do want to just note before I hand things back over to Zoe as she goes through the budget detail template, I mentioned the 10-page limit. That does not include your budget information. So your budget tables and narratives, which you'll need to create for your organization and for any organizations that are going to be receiving funding through the proposed project. Those will not count towards 10 pages. However, you should limit each of those budget tables and narratives to no more than 3 pages each. So with all of that, Zoe, I'll turn it back over to you so you can kind of walk through the budget piece.
Thank you, Sam. So I did want to cover a few steps that we outline that will be required as part of your budget template. So first, I did want to show, scrolling down to the table, how you can copy and paste the table if you are going to be including a budget for any project partners. So I'll kind of start that over. You might have seen how I just did that by clicking, but you can click anywhere in your table and then you'll see this symbol appear on the upper left. You'll just click on that. I tend to like using right click. You'll hit copy, scroll down into your Word document and paste another table. And so you can do that as many times as you need for all the additional tables that you might need for your project partners. Another thing that I did want to show is how easy it is to just enter total dollar amounts in the table. So here I'll just type in 1,000, type in a couple of examples of how we will be expecting to sort of see the amounts per year per category. And you can see I kind of provided a very brief, simple example of how that'll appear in year one. And another thing that I wanted to show, which is a feature in Word that should hopefully simplify your process for adding this up, because I know one limitation of requiring this maybe not in a application like Excel or a Google Sheets is maybe an inability to easily sum your numbers. So one really cool thing actually about Word is you can do this. So you can see I have my cursor in year two total. You can go to layout in your table and then you'll see that there's like a symbol in the upper row area, ribbon area where it says formula. So if you click on that formula, it'll kind of ask you what you want to do with this. You click OK, and it adds up the numbers that were included above for that year two to total that for you. Another cool feature is that it is not limited to just doing that in columns. You can also do the same thing in a row. So kind of want to show you what that looks like for adding up our year one and year two costs. And again, this budget is simplified just for this example purposes of what you can do in Word to easily add up your numbers. So same thing, you'll see it'll say sum left. It kind of knows already what you're thinking. You'll click OK, and it added up those to $1,000 for us. So I want to talk then a little bit more about just some general guidance related to our proposed, your proposed budget descriptions, especially by category. To do that, I am going to jump back into the presentation because it does include an example of the budget table on your slide. So one thing to always keep in mind as you're preparing your narrative for your budget table, this budget portion, is that the budget narrative should paint a clear picture of what is happening in each budget category and why. So a couple things to ask yourself, especially after you write your responses. Will PCCD or the reviewers understand how these budget items relate to the project implementation? So really looking at this VIP proposal narrative with your responses to the question as your budget is really painting the entire story of your proposal. So can PCCD clearly link the budgeted items that you are describing here to how they relate to the implementation of your project? So if you have questions as your organization is pulling together your application, we encourage you to check out the resources available through the PA Peace Alliance. Some of you might already be aware of this resource. This technical assistance initiative provides free training and technical assistance to organizations working to prevent and reduce community violence. You can check out the online resource library, which features research, tools, checklists, podcasts, videos, and other violence prevention and intervention resources on demand. In addition, groups can request technical assistance on a variety of topics, including how to navigate the application process. So for more information, please visit the website you see on your screen. It is www.papeacealliance.org. So in addition, questions about the fiscal year 23 to 24 VIP grants funding announcement and application process can also be submitted to PCD staff via email at ra-cd-vipgrants@pa.gov. Questions will be reviewed, answered, and posted to our active funding announcement webpage for reference as staff are able to process. So next we'll jump into a couple things, focusing mainly on our frequently asked questions and concerns that we've already started to hear from you, and also what you've asked us to cover as part of today's webinar. So we wanted to provide this slide on really how you can ask questions. So of course today, like we mentioned, the bulk of our presentation, we'll get into that very shortly, is you guys having the ability to ask us questions here. You can email that resource account, and then it's always important to reference the Q&A webpage because we'll post, as much as we can, post updated responses to that as frequently as we're able. So it's a good habit to maybe have that saved as a favorite in your internet browser, that you're constantly checking that in case you do have continuous questions on the funding announcement or the application process. And again, maybe as you're thinking about questions, we certainly encourage you to review the Q&A doc before you submit to the resource account, because it's very likely we might have answered a question similar to the one that you have. And again, it might be helpful to see if you can reference the funding announcement too, reading that in its entirety before submitting a question to the resource account. So very quickly, because I want to jump into our Q&A time period, I did want to just touch on a few frequently asked questions. So these are some important ones that we've been asked. There was some technical issues with downloading the document. I think we have since taken care of those technical issues, but if you do find yourself in that situation, please email the resource account as soon as possible, and we can do our best to take care of that for you, which could include sending you copies of the Word document proposal narratives. Another common question that we get that is really important to highlight, and we did mention it earlier in this presentation, was can current VIP grant recipients apply for this new round of funding? And the answer is yes. Entities that have previously received funding or are currently receiving funding are eligible to apply. And it is important to note that one of the priority considerations include the continuation of current successful projects whose current VIP grant funds have ended or are ending as of January 31st, 2024. Again, if you have questions on really what you need to do to manage a state grant appropriately, and how do I really prepare for that? How do I make sure that my organization is ready? Like we mentioned earlier, it's definitely important to review that PCE grant applicants readiness checklist for those organizations that are community-based organizations. And then again, I know sometimes our website can be a little bit difficult to navigate. So if you're used to applying for grants through our eGrant system, and you're not seeing it there, it is available on our funding and funding webpage. You just have to scroll down a little bit where you'll see that like table that appears like eGrants, and then you'll be able to see all the information, including the documentation for this current funding announcement. And then this next slide just provides a couple things to keep in mind if you are an approved applicant. These are really important things to consider to make sure your organization is ready for properly managing a state grant. So it is important to note that these grants are reimbursement only. We also have a few things that we recommend, including getting a checking account. It's not required, but it is something that we recommend. And then also, what does it really look like if you are an organization that has subrecipients under your application? It is important that only the applicant agency needs to be registered, but the payments go to those grantees, and then your agency as the applicant agency is responsible for paying the subrecipients. And again, if your organization is approved, these questions will be relevant if you are moving through our eGrants application process. So with all that said, I finally get to take a break from talking. We will jump into the Q&A time period so we can assist with answering some of the questions that you might have had previous to the webinar, even questions that might have come up as we've walked through our presentation.
Alrighty, so the first question with Sam, I believe that you can take a stab at this one. The question is, for model type number 15, are we able to pick prevention, intervention, and healing transformation, or should we choose other if we do more than one category?
That's a great question. So in the SurveyMonkey form, you're going to be prompted to select the one category that is most relevant to your program or project design. We certainly recognize that in this space, a lot of programs can kind of overlap in multiple areas. So we're asking folks to sort of use your best judgment on which one you think really speaks to the bulk of what you'll be doing with grant funds. I would recommend only selecting other if it's truly something that really doesn't kind of align with the examples that are on that page 5 of the funding announcement that Zoe referenced, just because we're going to use the information you're providing to kind of organize some of the back end review. And so it would just be helpful if you give us your kind of best guess or best judgment on that, so we can make sure that your application gets reviewed by folks who have requisite experience and expertise in that kind of area. And you can certainly use that proposal narrative or other sections of the application to kind of describe your rationale for which one you selected, and maybe also describe the ways that the proposal would also address some of those other types of strategies if you'd like. We're not going to penalize you in any way for kind of picking the wrong one there. Again, it's just really helpful for us to kind of organize the review on the back end and get a sense of kind of the types of strategies that folks are seeking funding for.
Awesome. Moving to the next one, we have a question from Jason. What are some basic metrics and measures that would be acceptable for this grant? For a small nonprofit, we have some limitations on robust data information systems.
Yeah, also a great question. And I'll also invite Zoe to jump in on this too, because she's been working really closely with our VIP evaluation partners at NORC. So I'm sure she has some thoughts on this. But I would generally say, you know, we've tried to keep the required performance measures for grantees to be fairly basic and straightforward. Things like the number of individuals that you're reaching and serving in a given quarter, the number of meetings that you're having with community partners. And during the onboarding process, you know, if your grant is selected, we can certainly work with you all to sort of talk through any concerns that you may have around data collection, the performance measures that maybe you've already tracked for that program that you think are best representative. But we've tried to be flexible on that front because we know that that's certainly a concern that's shared by a lot of the groups that we've funded historically. So Zoe, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would certainly echo that we certainly try to be understanding, especially with some smaller organizations, especially a small nonprofit. as you're maybe working to develop more of those like data collection processes. So in your application, if maybe you don't have any that are set, maybe you can come up with ones that you would like to measure. And then it is important to highlight that if you were an approved applicant as part of this process, that we work really closely with WestEd as the TA provider. And one of the things that they do really well is providing that type of support, especially to smaller organizations.
All righty. Moving on to the next question here. For current VIP grantees, is the max amount able to be requested minus our current award amount, or is it reset for this separate application?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's for this particular proposal. And so you should check out the funding announcement. We do define what we mean by an operating budget and the parameters around that. So you're going to look to the last year and what your organization or agency's operating budget is, and that's going to be your max request amount up to $950,000. So if you're already a VIP grantee, that really shouldn't affect your calculation on how much you can come in for. It that's really driven by the organizational operating budget.
Alrighty. Up next, from Dan. This is from a past grantee. He asked, can you give me an idea of what percentage of back-to-back applicants have gotten grants in the past? In other words, do we have a decent chance of being approved for a second grant if we've done well on the current grant and have a good proposal?
Well, we have no crystal balls, Dan, but what I would generally say is we have put priority status on both new applicants as well as grantees whose projects are ending and have demonstrated a lot of good outcomes. So what I would encourage you and others like you to do is use your application to describe the funding that you've already received and the impacts of your program. It is a competitive application, so again, carefully review that priority criteria and do your best to address those questions. And yeah, I think that's probably as much as we can say on that front.
All right, next question from Rachel. We're hoping to be a subrecipient on 2 grants. We would basically be offering the same services on both, but the overall proposals would be different. And importantly, they would each focus on different geographic areas. So they would serve different clients. Is that duplicative, or would that be enough of a difference?
Yeah, so without commenting on kind of the quality of that or anything like that, I would just say, and Zoe should jump in here too, but so there's nothing that prohibits an organization from being listed in others' applications. You can only submit one application directly. So I think that's really important for folks to understand. If you are included in another application or applications, I guess in this case, you're going to really need to be clear how those are different. And you're going to also need to take into account the requirements and criteria that's listed in the funding announcement. So Zoe, I don't know if there's anything else that you'd want to kind of add into the mix for that.
I don't have anything to add to that, Sam. I think you answered it well. Thanks.
Okay, perfect.
All righty, moving on. Crystal, we're going to have you answer this one. The question is, how are employee benefits calculated? In the example, you show 3,000 of the 60,000 in personnel expenses, which is 5%. Is there a maximum for this?
Okay, thank you. That's a good question. The employee benefits are really can really be the employer's share of benefits such as Social Security, Medicare, health, life insurance, unemployment compensation, workers' compensation, retirement, and things like that. So there's really no cap on it. I will say that the caveat to that is if you're funding a position at 50% full-time, you can only request up to 50% of the employer's share of the benefits. You can request less, but you can't request more. And then if you would be selected to enter an application in our eGrants system, you should also be prepared to itemize those benefits because they're itemized on separate lines under the employee benefits category. I hope that answers that question.
Awesome, thanks, Crystal. Zoe, we're going to switch gears back to you for this next one. Do we need to list out all of the personnel on the budget in the SurveyMonkey and list out their titles and activities on the grant, or do you want/need that in the budget description?
I'll let Crystal add to this too. Again, I think it's going to be helpful to provide a list of, you don't necessarily need like the position, like names, like the person's names. But if you are including certain positions dedicated, especially full-time, part-time as part of the grant, maybe describing their title and like what exactly the work would look like. This doesn't need to be, you know, paragraphs upon paragraphs. It can be 1 to 2 sentences of how the work that they're going to be doing contribute to the integral outcomes and goals and activities of your project proposal.
That's a perfect response.
Thank you, Crystal.
Okay, perfect. And another one, I'm not exactly sure, Sam or Zoe probably. Can you elaborate on what it means that PCCD's grants are reimbursement only?
Sure. I'll take that, and maybe Crystal might want to add to it too. So the way that PCCD processes reimbursement for their grants is through our fiscal reports. So organizations would have incurred the expense that are grant-related expenses as approved in your application budget in the eGrant system. And then through the fiscal reports that are required quarterly, but you can submit them more frequently, especially if you're an organization that needs a little bit more consistent cash flow. You can submit them really as frequently as you like. You will outline the costs that you've expended that are grant-related expenses in line with your budget, and then be reimbursed in the bank account that will be connected to your eGrants to receive that reimbursement.
That's absolutely correct. And I would encourage everyone to remember that there are fiscal reports and program reports in the system. So they kind of work hand in hand to provide a clear picture of everything that's going on. And the expenditures that you report in your fiscal report will be reimbursed as soon as the fiscal report is reviewed and approved.
Thanks, Crystal.
Okay, so I think in the interest of time, we've got 3 more minutes left, and we certainly want to be sensitive to folks' schedules. We received more questions than we were able to get through, which is often the case with these kinds of webinars. So we appreciate people's engagement. Please rest assured that while we weren't able to verbally address all of the questions that were submitted, we are going to take that back and update our written Q&A document with the responses to those questions. I would also encourage groups, if you have a really burning question, please utilize the resource account email address that's listed in the funding announcement to submit that question directly to our team. So if you feel like you didn't have enough space in the chat to kind of fully address or describe your question, please feel free to send our team a note, and we will respond to that question and post the information publicly for everyone to see. We have one more thing to highlight. We mentioned some additional gun violence related funding opportunities. So for folks who have been in and around PCCD's funding circles for a while, you know that we often pitch the grant notifications sign up that you can have. So we definitely encourage you to do that if you don't already receive funding announcement notifications. One funding opportunity that's actively open right now that we wanted to highlight in case folks weren't already aware is actually one that's coming up due next week. So this is related to our Burns State Crisis Intervention Program, or SCIP, local solicitation. So this funding, which is about $3.5 million in federal dollars, local governments can come in to apply for a variety of strategies that focus on priority areas aligned with Pennsylvania's Burns SCIP funding plan. And that includes improvements to crisis services and supports, with a focus on people and communities that experience gun violence, improving coordination of services and responses to gun violence victimization, as well as efforts to address the intersections of domestic violence and intimate partner violence with gun violence. So again, encourage you to take a look at that if that piques your interest. The deadline is coming up, and also encourage you to bookmark the active funding announcements webpage and sign up for those notifications. So with all of that, we are almost at 3 p.m. Would like to thank you for your time and thank you for your interest. We really appreciate you, and we're looking forward to reviewing applications, and hope you found today's session to be helpful. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Happy holidays and Happy New Year. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Thanks so much.